So African architecture is usually underrepresented, as otherwise underrepresented in this class as well. But African architecture had a great impact on European modernism, because, for example, if you look at Picasso's sculpture, well, this is Picasso's collection of African sculpture. If you look at Picasso's painting, right, his cubism bear great kind of imprint by those so-called primitive art of African sculpture and African art. So on one hand, the European power would consider these primitive, consider African art and architecture simple and primitive. On the other hand, they appropriate their form for their creation, and when they did that, those would be acclaimed as great innovation. So we should be able to see that irony in that appropriation. So the African architecture had been, neglected, partially because the colonial power had considered them as something belonging to those uncivilized, primitive people. But as early as the mid 20th century, there were theorists, there were architects who started to appreciate traditional African architecture, especially when environmental issue became a problem. So we started to see more and more the benefit and advantages of African architecture. So the first aspect about African architecture I want to introduce in this short lecture is traditional African architecture was a result of the environment, and it coexists with environment, and it also left zero carbon footprint on the environment, right? But we will also see there are also rich symbolism in African architecture, and they were never merely a utilitarian solution to shelter, and they communicate meaning and was a significant way to way of life in its multiple religious, social, and cultural facet. So we will look at the focus on the Western Africa. This area, it changed from, the environment changed from the very wet coastal area to the wet savanna, to the dry savanna, to the dry kind of a semi-desert environment, to the pure desert, right? So this slice has a transition, environmental transition, and their architecture were constructed accordingly. So yeah, so we will look at that slice and look at how traditional African architecture cope with environment using quite innovative method and construction. So in the Genvi village in today's Benin, the Republic of Benin used to be known as Dahomey. So architecture were constructed on stilt, right? So here it's very wet. It's the equatorial rain produce those wet and humid climate with even temperature. So you don't need to you don't need insulation. You don't need much insulation. So it's just for privacy, right? And there were also a abundance of straight timber. tidal marshes and river valleys, in those environment, houses were elevated on stilt, and the main method of communication is by boat. And during the wet season, the only one is by boat. So they constructed those stilt house. And the construction of the stilt house used timber, and they can be dismantled, and they can also be relocated based on their need. So moving a little bit up to the inland savanna region, the situation is different. And in the wet savanna region, so the daily temperature varies up to 30 Fahrenheit. So there's hot days and cold nights. So Aboriginal people built those circular houses, and because of the huge difference in day and night temperature, so the insulation is very important. So they use earth to construct the wall, and agriculture was important here as well, instead of fishery in the wet area. So there was also an importance for the construction of granary. So they construct houses and they construct granaries. They use wood to create a armature, the framework for the house. And then they use the wattle and the daup technique to create the wall. Wattle and daup is basically you throw those wet clay to a framework of wood and create those insulation layers. And this is also a fast construction method. And they use both circular plan as well as rectangular plan. So here we have those a compound connecting smaller houses into one larger compound. And so in the regions close to river, earth is mixed with crushed shells and fish bone to give it concrete-like strength and smoothness that lend itself to decoration. And in other places, they also mixed the clay with the millet stalks to create more integrated wall structure. And the walls often kind of taper downward. The upper part is wider, which is opposite to most architectural traditions. And they also use hand and tools used for farming or pottery for the construction of their house. So basically, it is the same tool for pottery as well. And in the dry savanna region, a different type of clay architecture was created by the coiling technique. So basically, you create those large ropes of clay and then coil it to define those circular space. Sometimes they use brick or adobe, and those are basically wet balls, and so that they can create those circular parts. And so you are seeing these house in construction. Someone is throwing those clay ball for the builder who piled them up to create those walls. So their house resemble their pottery very much. And there's also a gender division. So men bring the earth and women bring the water. And men was responsible for construction and women for decoration. So the results are very pleasing, visually pleasing, and very aesthetically attractive as well. The entrance, by the way, was cut out after the completion of the structure. So this is a granary in the Dukawa region in today's Nigeria. And the granary, and you can see the resemblance between these architecture and pottery. So it's basically a large pottery. And granaries are suspended from the ground, and the access was through a hole on the side. And those holes were also created after the structure dried and after they put up the roof and complete the whole construction. And like a pottery, the cooking fire could make their house stronger, right? So here we have a house, and those heat from cooking will strengthen the earth structure and make them into those real kind of solid giant pottery house, which is a very interesting phenomena as well. So this is, now let's move on to the dry savanna area. Dry savanna area, the clay was not that available because when you use clay for construction, you need water. You need plenty of water. So here, architecture is a hybrid, combining earth wall with a tent-like structure. So they use a lot more wood, a lot more plants. And with absence of wood, they would bundle the acacia bush branches and use for the roof structure. So here the roof structure are acacia bundled, and then the wood was only used for the supporting structure, and then coat them with clay. And so this is another example of use even less clay, right, and a more kind of tent-like structure. And here these are in the kind of more dry desert area. Even the clay became not available. So they use camel hide and for construction of those tent structure. And these were mostly for the Sahara Berbers. The Sahara Berbers, they are nomadic people. They ride on camel, and their house could be carried by camel, and they move to a new location, following the water, following the oasis, and make a living that way. So now let's take a look at another aspect of African architecture. That is the kind of symbolic element. So I'm going to move faster. Symbolism, human body is a very important symbol for architecture. This is true for classical architecture. In classical architecture, we have capital, that is obviously, the head. So, and African architecture, there's an even clearer reference to human body. So there is a more obvious anthropomorphism in architecture. So their architecture, they refer to different part of their building as head, eye, lips, tongue, nose, ear, penis, anus, etc. So those different parts are compared to different part of the human body, and different ritual activity were happening at a different part of those, corresponding part of the human body. And the wall are compared to skin, and you can see the decoration on their house is similar to their scarification of their body. They kind of decorate their own body the same way as they decorate their house. Or in this case, granary is compared to a womb, and there's a small smaller granary holding the seed for the next season, just like the womb hold the baby for the next generation. I think I'm going to just skip these few, another kind of the anthropomorphism can be applied to a whole village, a whole clan as well. Right? Sometimes a whole village is referred to as, location of the chest, the head, the feet, etc. Excuse me. Very interesting architecture. Now let's take a brief look at those monumental architecture in Africa. Segmented society do not require permanent architectural expression. While monumental architecture in Africa was associated with the formation of kingdoms and influence of Christianity and Islam. In South Africa, Zimbabwe, which is here, and we will look at a few examples. Zimbabwe here, and a Christian church in Ethiopia, and also another Islamic church in Western Africa. So Zimbabwe, the country got its name from this great enclosure, because Zimbabwe means great enclosure. So it's, for Africa, this is prehistoric because there's no written record, even though it was created in the 11th century to 15th century under the Zimbabwe kingdom, but there was no written record for it. So it's a huge structure. On the hill, there is Acropolis, and under the hill, there is those great masonry enclosure. So I'm going to show you these pictures, great works of masonry construction, wet masonry, monumental scale, permanent structure. And it reminded me those pre-Columbian Mayan and Incan architecture. So this is a Christian church. It was built in the 13th century, and it was a rock-cut church. It is in the Greek cross shape, but it's totally carved out of a mountain. And it was carved a pit, and then that building was created in the pit. So you need to go down from the stair and approach its entrance. So it's a rock-cut church, like what we have been studying, those rock-cut temple in India and China for Buddhism. So this is the interior, the crossing, and the ceiling. Now, finally, Islamic architecture in Mali. And this one combined the African material and technology with the new faith of Islam. So you see the entrance, the southern entrance, and the prayer hall, the mihrab. And this is the Qibla direction because Mecca is in that direction. Constructed with earth and wood, without figurative decoration, using wood to create those interesting pattern and those teeth above. They are abstract, and they create kind of interesting profile for architecture, and at the same time fulfill the requirement for uniconic Islam. The interior, the pillars are very thick, very thick. So the interior is dark. The space is narrow. You can see those columns are really like short walls. But there's no ambiguity that this is a Islamic architecture. And the wall. So this is a African solution to the faith of Islam.